classes about how the rules apply, about how these rules apply during the while you're racing. So what I like to, so don't feel bad if it gets confusing. You should definitely come to the seminar next year when I give it again, and you can learn more then. The other big piece of advice is that the whole purpose of the rules is to keep people from hitting each other. And that is the number one takeaway, is that you, even if you don't know a rule, we're going to get into, there's one rule that talks about this, is that you have an obligation not to get into contact or get in an accident, even if you have right of way over someone else. The Bill Colburn, who is one of the fastest racers on Lake Harriet and wins most of the races every year, if he is, maybe he has right of way and he's going around a lured mark, but he'll probably usually allow someone else to get through, even if they didn't have right of way, and give them room in order to avoid conflict. Because in his opinion, getting around the course fastest is avoiding conflict as much as possible, even if you have the right of way. So don't feel like if you get into a situation where you might not know the rule, or that you think you're right and someone is going to just go, definitely avoiding contact is number one. Number two takeaway is that communication is also very important as you're racing, and it makes you a faster sailor to communicate with the other boats. But also the rules, people have different kind of an understanding of what the rules are, and someone thinks that they're right or the other boat is right. It's definitely good to talk, and we'll talk about that communication as we go through the rules. And so we are going to, so let's start with just an overview for the people who are newer to racing. We're going to do an overview of the, let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that? Can you see the PowerPoint? Everyone good? So these are just some concepts that you should know, that we'll need to know as we talk about the rules. The vast majority of the courses that we sail every weekend on Lake Harriet are windward lured courses, and we'll have a starting line. We'll go up to a windward mark, around the windward mark, go around the leeward mark, and then we usually finish to windward, and that's where the finish line is. One of the other major concepts that you need to know and that we're going to be talking about are ley lines, the starboard ley line and the port ley line. The starboard ley line is the lane line that the position that your boat is on the course to be able to sail in a straight line, and then you can get around typically we're always talking about the windward mark. So when you get to that starboard ley line, that means that you don't have to tack anymore and you can get around that windward mark. Now some of the, before the start, okay. John, we're just going to go with what we have here. And so we can get through this. This is kind of a intro. So we're just going to watch. I know it's the presenter. So we have, these are some of the flags that you're going to see while you're out on the course usually before the start. This is the postponement flag. And then when you go into starting sequence, we have our class flags. We have a I flag. This flag is the flag that's flown during the starting sequence to indicate that you have to go around the ends. And we'll talk about that later in the seminar, but you should recognize that flag. This is the I flag. This is the life jacket flag. This flag is flown by the race committee, usually in May and later in September when the water's cold, so that or heavy air. so you're required to wear a life jacket. So then we'll go through quickly get through the starting sequence here. On the weekends, we race with a 5-minute starting sequence. At 5 minutes, there will be a horn and the class flag will go up. At 4 minutes, so 1 minute later, another horn, and then the I flag comes up. And we won't get into the Z flag or I and Z. Those are, they've never, very, very rarely come up on Lake Harriet. This is more of a regatta thing. And we always see that I flag that I showed you in an earlier slide. And then with 1 minute to go, you'll hear another horn and the I flag will come down. And then at that point, what that means, and we're going to get into this rule later on, when that I flag comes down, that means 1 minute to go between the before the start, that you cannot go over the starting line. And if you do go over the starting line, you need to round the end, but either the pin, the buoy on one end of the starting line, or the committee boat. And then after a minute, you'll hear a final horn, the class flag comes down, and then the race starts. So here's the sequence. If you're over early, this is the individual recall flag. So if you're over early, the race committee will fly this flag. They'll do one horn, and then we'll be calling on a radio or on the megaphone, the hailer, to tell you that you're over early. Excuse me. Okay. So that's just a quick summary to go through some of the flags that you'll see, and we'll talk about it later on. So we're if you can follow along on the handout that I sent. And we're going to talk about some terminology, and usually we do more participation, but it's a little harder here because it is Zoom. But generally speaking, we have starboard and port. We're going to be talking about a lot. Starboard is when the boat is sailing in a particular direction and the wind is hitting the right side, the starboard side of the boat. The other way to think about it is that the boom is on if the boom is on the left or the port side, then you're on a starboard tack, and opposite on a port. When you're on port, if you look, let's see here, resume share. Okay, here we go. Now, can you see the animations? So on this screen, the red boat is on starboard, and the blue boat is on port. That blue arrow is the wind direction. So you can see that the wind is hitting the left side of the boat, the blue boat, and the boom is on the other side. So that the blue boat is on starboard, the red boat is on, or the blue boat's on port, the red boat is on starboard. We're going to be talking about, we'll get into windward, leeward. Windward is, a boat is windward to another boat if it is upwind or closer to the wind than the leeward boat. And then we'll talk about overlap is another term that I'll explain when we get into a later animation. So getting into the rules, we start with the common sense rules. And the first rule, the number one rule, is that we help people who are in danger. So if there's a boat that's tipped over that needs help and one of the safety boats can't get it, there's an expectation that you racing are going to help someone who's in danger. This has happened on Lake Harriet. We had a situation 2 summers ago where one of the sailors who was in first place on the race he developed vertigo, and he kind of just dropped everything and sat there on his boat. And we didn't know if he was having a stroke or what, but it was in the middle of the course with the safety boats weren't around. And all the people who were around him kind of stopped racing and made sure that he was okay and made sure a safety boat was going to get over to him. So that's that number one. It does definitely, we try to keep that in mind, that we always want to be safe while we're out on the course. Number two is fair sailing, that we want to be good sports, and we want to be, fair to each other. We try not to be, it's really kind of bad sportsmanship to be jerks to each other on the course. I feel like sailing, maybe in the past, people were a little more, they would yell at each other, and maybe some other lakes are a little more like that. Lake Harriet has a reputation, and I think it's our culture that even if things get tense on the race course, is that we're all nice to each other and kind to each other, and we don't yell at each other, swear at each other, and it's that fair sailing, I think, is a kind of all-encompassing. When you're racing, you agree to accept the rules, is rule 3, and number 4 is it's always your decision to race. So if you get out there, it's your decision to feel that the conditions are safe enough for you to go out. If the wind is too high, or it's too hot, the temperature's too hot or too cold, always understand it's your responsibility to make an individual decision about whether or not you're racing. So getting into the actual racing itself, when boats meet, the first rule, the rule that kind of comes up the most often, is that if boats are on opposite tacks, the boat on starboard tack has right of way over the boat on port tack. That's rule 10. So this first animation, you'll see that the boat on the red boat, which is on starboard tack, and the blue boat is on a port tack. The red boat has right of way over the blue boat. Now, this comes into play. That was on the last animation where people were going upwind. The next animation here is while people are going downwind. And it is the understanding which boat is on port and which boat is on starboard. People get confused a little bit when they're going downwind. Even really experienced sailors, I've had to remind them that they're on starboard or that they're on port and I'm on starboard. So here, it's the same concept though. The boat, the blue boat is now on starboard and the red boat is on port. So the blue boat has right of way over the red boat. So what happens here is that the blue boat can keep sailing on his or her course, and the red boat needs to avoid contact. Now we're going to try a little quiz here on this next animation. Okay, we're going to watch the animation and then try in your chat function to say which boat has right of way. Yep, we got the blue boat. Thank you for everyone posting. We have the blue boat. Actually, you're right. This rule actually doesn't. I got my animations. I had to change around, so this one should go for a later rule. That a boat clear ahead is going to be the boat to leeward is going to be right away over the red boat. And so that's why it's a little bit, I guess, of a trick question here. So we'll keep going here. Number 2, if you are on the same tack, the leeward boat has right of way over the windward boat. So and a boat coming up from behind can hit the boat ahead. So this animation is showing that rule, and good job from all the people that said blue. That blue is clear ahead, and blue is to leeward of the red boat. So here the red boat is going faster than the blue boat, so the red boat needs to so I take that back. Sorry, guys. Because they're on opposite tacks, it's still that the red boat needs to stay clear. So ignore what I had said earlier. Thank you, Ryan, for catching that. It's the red boat that is has right of way, because red is on starboard and blue is on port. So that starboard port is kind of overrides the clear ahead rule. So what blue needs to watch out here, if blue is ahead, blue needs to jibe to stay clear, to be on the same tack. Because remember that when if boats are on opposite tacks, so that would be one's on port, one's on starboard, then the boat on starboard has right of way on the boat on port.
Joe, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm still not getting why is the blue boat on starboard?
Good question. And again, this is what it takes some reminder to who's on starboard and who's on port. The red boat is on starboard, and the blue boat is on port. That's my mistake. The red boat is on starboard, so the red boat has right of way over the blue boat.
I get that, but why is the red boat on starboard?
Why is the red boat on starboard? Because the red boat's boom is on the left side of the boat.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's the only way to tell, correct? Because they're down.
Correct. When you're going downwind, it's a little different.
Thank you.
What's that? One more time. Okay. So going on to number 2 here, if you're on the same tack, the leeward boat has right of way over the windward boat, and a boat coming up from behind can't hit the boat ahead. This is rule 11 and rule 12. Kevin, you asked a question. Red has right of way, but does he have obligation to stay out of blue's way? This is back on the last. I'll just answer this one really quick. This is a question I got from Kevin. So the red boat has right of way, but does he have an obligation to stay out of blue's way? No, the blue boat needs to stay out of red's way if they both stay on the same tack. If red is on starboard and blue is on port, the blue boat needs to stay out of red's way, or the blue boat could jibe and get on a starboard tack, and then the next rule that we were about to talk about governs. So then blue would have right of way over red because they're on the same tack. Luke asked a question, which direction should blue go to stay out of red's way? So what blue should do here, if blue wants to stay on port tack, blue should head up and let's annotate. So let's see here. So blue should head this way if blue wants to stay on that port tack, because presumably blue wants to stay on port because blue sees some wind coming in this direction, and so blue would stay out of the way, come over here, get better air, and then go down towards the mark. The alternative is for blue again to jibe, to move his or her boom to the other side of the boat, and then blue would have right of way over red. Okay. Now blue, let's see here. Mouse. So this is the rules for this next number 2. The boats are on the same tack. They're both on starboard, and red is leeward of blue. So red has right of way over blue. What blue should be doing here, or excuse me, blue should be looking around. If blue doesn't see red, red really should be communicating with blue and telling blue that red is right of way and that blue needs to keep clear. There's no rule obligation to say that, but it's just common courtesy to communicate and talk for red to tell blue that red is, that blue needs to head up is the typical words or term that we use. This happens occasionally, this interaction when we round the windward mark, or when we are rounding the leeward mark. We see this a lot. A boat, red was out ahead, rounded the leeward mark. And now red tacks after coming around that leeward mark. And now red is on starboard and blue is on port. Excuse me. Blue is on starboard. They're both on starboard here. So they need to blue, typically what we see here is blue is watching for all the boats behind him. And so, but blue needs to look out for red. As red tacks, red is going to be coming on starboard through all these boats, and all these boats need to keep clear of red, all the blue boats and any other boats that are approaching the leeward mark here. Okay, and then now we have, let's see here. Now this animation is kind of showing you what, to answer John's question, red is leeward on that last animation. Red is leeward of blue, and so red has right of way over blue. Okay, in this animation, blue is to leeward of red because blue is on the far side of the boat where the boom is. That's kind of how I think of it. But blue is leeward of red. They're both on the same tack, and so blue has right of way over red. Okay, and this last one, on this rule here, is that they are both on the same tack. They're both on port tack. Blue is clear ahead. Blue has right of way over red. And I would like to demonstrate, talk to you a little bit about overlap, that term that I mentioned before. Here, blue is, when I say clear ahead, that means there's no overlap. And what I mean by overlap is that if you draw an imaginary line behind blue, as long as the red's bow, the front of red's boat isn't over that imaginary line, then there's no overlap, and blue is clear ahead of red. As opposed to the last animation. Hold on a sec. Here, there is overlap, because if we draw an imaginary line, if we draw an imaginary line here, that it would actually be behind red's boat here. This blue is ahead of this imaginary line behind of red's boat, so blue is overlapped, and then that means blue is to leeward and blue can head red up. Okay. Number 3 on our outline. If you're passing another boat and are on the same tack, you cannot sail above your proper course, which means the course that is fastest around the course. So this is a rule that is commonly misunderstood by even a lot of advanced sailors. And I will show you an animation here. So the rule is that when you're passing a boat, you can't blue can't force this red boat up above his or her proper course. So blue right now is clear ahead, or red is clear ahead because there's no overlap. So right now, they're both on the same tack. They're both on a port tack, but red is ahead of blue. So blue isn't overlapped. So red has right of way. Now, once blue creates that overlap, now blue has right of way over red. But because blue is passing from behind, blue can't force red above blue's proper course. Now, what proper course means, as the outline says, is that what's the fastest way around the course for you. So if blue sees that there's a bunch of wind that's over here, really like heavy air over here, then blue could say to red that I want to head up to get over to this puff that's coming down on this side of the course, and blue would have the rights, because blue is right of way, to come over here to the to that puff. But because if that extra wind isn't there, then because blue establishes overlap from behind, that means blue can't sail above her proper course and force red up. Hold on a sec, here we go. Now there are 2 exceptions. Oh shoot, that's not what I wanted. Okay. There are 2 exceptions to this rule. One, so here blue passed from behind, was clear behind, now created an overlap. So now blue is right of way, but blue can't force red up. But if blue is coming from outside of 2 boat lengths from red, so blue is far enough away from red, then blue can head red up if blue wants to. Okay, Adam had a question. If this is I'm gonna show you on the last animation. Adam asked, if your overlap established from behind and to leeward, does it matter which side did you establish overlap from? And it wouldn't matter for blue if blue established overlap on the other side of red, because blue is, if that happens, if blue is on the other side of red, so if blue is over here, red would have right of way over blue, and then this concept of coming up from behind wouldn't apply. The only time this comes up, and it does come up fairly often on the race course, is when one of the boats is passing from behind and gains leeward overlap, so the passing boat has right of way and can force red up. So, so this comes up, this animation comes up usually when if boats they're going downwind and they're coming from opposite sides of the race course and they're both going towards the leeward mark, and then they come in close contact, because they've blue might be passing from behind, but it's coming from so far away, then blue can head red up. The other exception is this one. So this rule only applies when you gain overlap from behind. But here, blue gets overlap and then jibes. So then they're overlapped, but they're not on the same tack. And then blue jibes again. And now blue can head red up, because blue is on established overlap from jibing rather than establishing overlap from behind. Luke's question: because of the overlap, blue became leeward boat. The key is that blue became was leeward boat and on the same tack, not from coming from behind, but by jibing. Okay, we'll keep going here. Number 4 on the outline. If you're attacking, you have to stay out of the way of other boats sailing in a straight line while you're attacking. That's rule 13. I'll play the whole animation. So, right now, red is ahead of blue, and red is sailing, and red's going to tack. And while red is tacking, red doesn't have right of way. But so they're both on port here. And now red tacks, but doesn't pull red's sailings, but red's on starboard and blue is on port. So red has right of way over blue. So we'll take a poll. Another question for you guys. When red tacks here, red does not have any right of way while red tacks, but when red's on starboard, red has right of way. So the question for you to answer, when has red established the starboard right of way? And your options are when red starts to move red's boat through the tack, right after red comes head to wind, after red gets through the tack but hasn't pulled the sail in, or after red pulls the sail in. When does red have starboard rights? Is it when, I'm going to say that one more time. So is it when, right now, when red starts to tack, right after red head comes to wind, now when red is on a starboard course, or after red pulls his or her boom in? I'll give you 3 more seconds. Okay, we have everyone, at least one person guessed every answer, so it's good that we need to talk about this. The rule is that when red gets on red's starboard course, then red has right of way. So that means that, let's see, back it up. While red is moving the boat from a port tack to a starboard tack, that's while red is tacking. And red has right of way, gets that starboard right of way as soon as red gets to that close hauled course. So the course that the boat is pointing. It has nothing to do with pulling the boom in. It's not right after you come across past head to wind, and it's not when you start moving. All that time while red is tacking between when red starts to move from port to starboard to when red finishes that starboard movement is when red has right of way. Well, that's while red is tacking. Red doesn't get that starboard right of way until red is on that starboard course. The sail position doesn't matter. Perfect, Ryan. So for example, so what I do, so yes, for Stephen, this protest, if this happened and this protest would be thrown out, blue would lose the protest over red. So, but what happens, this is a lot easier to determine because we're watching an animation. Typically while we're out sailing, if I'm red, I don't know if I have room to complete that tack for blue. So what I do, let's say I think I have room, it's really important in this scenario for red to communicate to blue. So the way I do it, and I encourage you all to do it, I do this for almost every tack, if there's anyone around, is that if I'm red, I'll yell at blue. I'll say, "Blue, I'm tacking." And then when I start the tack, I tell blue, "Blue, I'm starting to tack." And then once my boat is on a starboard tack, I tell blue, "Completed tack." I'll say that to blue anytime there's another boat that's close. And what that does is that red can say right now, "Blue, red can say I've completed my tack." Blue has plenty of room to move out of the way. Now, if red finishes that tack and blue doesn't have any opportunity to get out of the way, then blue, which we'll talk about that in a later rule, but blue, once red doesn't have any right of way until red gets on that starboard tack. And so blue doesn't have any obligation to stay out of the way until red is there on that starboard tack. So as long as, if blue doesn't have any room to get out of the way of red before red finishes, then blue would have maybe their protest would be more valid if they're a lot closer. Okay, so this next animation is going to highlight that rule. So if you look at number 5 on your outline, anytime you have the right of way, you may turn towards another boat, but you must be sure that the other boat has enough time and space to get out of the way. So, so red, they're both on starboard tack, and red is to leeward of blue. So red is right of way over blue. Red starts to head blue up towards the wind. And now red bears off, and red's stern, the back of red's boat, kicks out and hits blue. So in this scenario, blue didn't have any way to get out of the way here. And so red would lose this protest if there was a protest. Red was in the wrong here. Even though red had right of way over blue, because red was to leeward, and they're on the same tack as blue. As soon as red starts moving away from blue without giving enough room for blue to stay out of the way, then red would be wrong and red would get disqualified if there's a protest. Okay, number 6, you must avoid collisions if possible. Avoiding contact. This is the rule that really should take precedence over almost every other rule. That our boats are expensive and they break easily. Gel coat chips off very easily. So we always want to stay clear of other people as much as possible and avoid contact. So here, red is on starboard, blue is on port. Red has right of way over blue, but red didn't, but they just keep sailing and they T-bone each other. Blue is still wrong because blue was on port, but red also, if red saw blue, red is also violated rule 14. So if red caused, under this rule, the kind of the details, if red caused damage to blue or caused any type of injury, then red would be disqualified from the race for doing that, even though red is on starboard. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little about protests. If there is a foul, if you are red here and blue isn't staying out of the way, what you need to do to protest someone is say the word protest. You can't. Protest is a magic word on the race course that you're not going to be. Blue is not going to be disqualified in general unless red says the word protest. And you need to say it immediately, telling someone to do your turns or telling someone that you followed me or you're wrong or stay out of my way. None of that forces blue in this scenario to do turns. And you can't file a protest unless you say that magic word protest. A lot of people get that. A lot of people will get that wrong if they don't say the word protest. And in fact, if you file a protest, then you will find there's actually a question on the protest form that you fill out that says, how did you hail the other boat? How did you talk to the other boat about the protest? And if you don't write that I said protest to that boat, then the protest isn't going to go anywhere. Rajiv, are you both disqualified? I assume that he's talking about Rule 14 here, going back. Another question here. In this scenario, if red didn't avoid, if red's on starboard, red and blue hit each other. If red saw blue and didn't avoid contact, and red causes damage to blue or causes an injury, then both blue and red would be disqualified. And you know, you have to jump through the hoops of saying protest, and then they don't do their turns. But that's why that protest, Luke, your quote, protest is a magic word. You got to say it for anything to happen.
Joe, in that example, could you, if red is hit, could red go to the race committee and ask for a redress?
Yeah, so that's another concept of redress. We're not going to get into details about redress because it's it comes up so infrequently. But yeah, there's a way that if red is damaged and that they have to fall out, that red can, and they can't complete the race, red can ask for the race committee to give them a particular place in the race as if they would have finished it. But we're not going to go through the details of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we're going to talk about mark room and obstructions. So when you are, the general rule is that when you're 3 boat lengths from a mark, you have to give any boat between you and the mark room to round it and pass it. Ryan Grosh just had a really good comment. It's easy to cause small jellicoat damage on an MC if you make any contact. So definitely it's good to avoid, especially because it's expensive and you'll be violating Rule 14 if you come in contact with someone and you could have gotten out of the way. Okay, so that's the simple rule for marks and obstructions, that when you're 3 boat lengths from the mark, you have to give mark room to anyone who's in between you and the mark. So here we have a lured mark. We have a 3 boat length circle, which is the light blue, and then we have 2 boats that came in here. And blue is between red and the mark, so that means red has to give mark room to blue. Now, blue needs to, the only extra comment on this is that blue cannot sail, cannot take mark room, can't sail beyond the mark in this scenario, but blue has to jibe around the mark. And Kevin just had a comment, wow, hard to see the small difference on the water. Yeah, that's a really good point, Kevin. That the 3 boat length circle is, it's an imaginary 3 boat length circle. So sometimes it's hard to tell when you get there. What I like to do, this is another one of those communication points, is that if I'm blue, as soon as I think that I hit the 3 boat length circle, I will say that to red, that I'd say blue. If I'm blue, I say, okay, 3 boat lengths, I'm entitled to mark room. And I want to make sure, make it clear, make no misunderstandings that if I'm blue, I have mark room to get around the mark and red needs to keep clear. So blue has room, that mark room entitles blue room to round the mark. Blue has room to sail to the mark and to round it. In order for blue to round the mark, blue needs to be able to jibe as blue goes around the mark. but red's boom is there. So red needs to give blue more room than that. And even if it's that little contact, blue needs to, so red's wrong here. Red needs to do circles. It needs to do turns. So one more time. Blue is to inside of red. Blue gets to the 3 boat length circle, so blue has mark room. Blue now has room to sail to the mark and to round it. Jason had a question, doesn't blue have rights because it is the lure boat? Blue does have, rights as lured boat. And so blue has both rights as the lured boat as well as mark room. Now there are a lot of other, typically when we do this, we have I have a lot of animations that talk about this and different iterations of it, but it doesn't work as well, I think, on the Zoom, so I've cut out a lot of the animations. But the key is that whoever gets to that, once a boat hits that 3 boat length circle, then you're gonna try to establish if there's overlap or not. I've got a couple more animations here. Okay, so now again here, blue is inside of red. Blue has mark room. Red is going faster than blue. But blue here has sailed all the mark room that blue gets is blue has room to sail to the mark and to round it. So technically, red has right of way over blue because they're both on, because blue is to lured, or excuse me, red is to lured of blue. So when red has to give blue mark room, but that mark room is limited to being able to sail to the mark and to round it. So what red can do is red can force blue up to sail up, and because red has right of way over blue. So as blue rounds the mark, red can force blue up, can't force blue up into the mark, and red can't force blue into the mark, but red can make sure that blue doesn't take too much room. So here, blue has sailed much further than, let's see here. Blue has sailed much further than is needed. And so blue is wrong and red can protest blue. Okay, let's see, we had a couple questions here. Let's see, are there any, Pat asked, are there any tricks to developing a sense for 3 boat lengths? Not really. I think just experience. You know, so what some people do before the season is that they will measure 3 boat lengths is a lot. You know, 16 times 3 is 48. So that's 48 feet is 3 boat lengths. It's a big, it's a long distance. So what I do, Pat, is it's all about communication and saying, whoever basically says 3 boat lengths, if you're even close to 3 boat lengths and you say I'm at 3 boat lengths, usually that's going to establish it. So that's why it's really important. Like if you go to let's say there's a question about whether or not you're at 3 boat lengths or not, and everyone heard you say, okay, I'm at 3 boat lengths. Usually that's going to carry the day because you've been talking about it. So definitely, and you can, it's loud on the course with sails flapping, so it's definitely a good idea to speak up. You don't need to be rude, but definitely communicating is key for establishing that for telling everyone that you're at 3 boat lengths. And you'll hear me every single time on Lake Harriet. If there's any other boats around, you'll hear me say 3 boat lengths if there's a boat outside of me. John, let's see. There's another question. What if inside boat can't round without changing course, the inside ley line? What if the inside boat can't change course, inside ley line? So I assume that
So
question.
what I'm saying is, if the inside, if blue is so, they get to the 3 boat length first in terms of the being close to the mark, but they really can't. They've really come up so sort of to the, as we're looking at it, to the right of the mark, really, that they're going to have to change their course to round. Even though they were in first, they really didn't pick a good line to the mark, and they're going to have to change course. Does the red boat still have to, if you imagine that animation where the blue boat is that much farther over, but still inside the circle first, does red have to, fall off, fall away from the mark, or give that guy still room just because he chose, sort of a poor line to the mark, but still got?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if blue, let's say blue is coming in this direction, and so blue has to do a huge tight turn like that, and it's really windy, so blue is probably not going to do a tight turn because blue is going to slide out, and it's really going to be like this. Blue's mark room entitles blue to sail blue's proper course around the mark. So what that means is sailing in a direction and in a manner that allows blue to get around the mark as fast as possible. So that would allow blue, there's some, I would say there's some leeway there for blue, as long as blue is doing blue's best to get around the mark in a fast way, even if it takes, takes blue beyond the mark. If blue is going fast around the mark, then that's blue's proper course. So blue does have some leeway there. Plus, just in general, just from a in practical sense, blue's going to have plenty of benefit of the doubt as blue's coming around, because blue is mark room and is doing blue's best to get around. What if blue entered the circle on port tack, asks Brad. Blue would still have right of way regardless if blue is on port or starboard, as long as blue is, if blue hits that 3 boat length circle and is inside overlapped. The only exception to that is if blue is comes head to wind, it passes head to wind. So if blue tacks or while blue is in that 3 boat length circle, then blue loses its mark room. That rarely comes up in our fleet racing that we do on Lake Harriet. It does come up in the windward mark, but which we'll talk about in a second, but a leeward mark, it's not too much. Stephen asks, when is round the mark accomplished? In my opinion, there's no definite rule here. In my opinion, once blue's stern is no longer overlapped with the mark, so that would be, I'd say if blue rounded, if blue rounded and was like right, and blue's stern is right there, that's when the round has finished and you lose your mark room. So if there's any way that if blue headed up and it was going to hit the mark, then you're still rounding it. But once you're past the mark, then you're no longer rounding it, because your rights are just getting to the mark and sailing to the mark and rounding it to get you. The spirit of the rule is to get you around the mark as safely as possible. Okay, Ryan, and they get room to jibe, so look out for the boom. Yep. Rajiv, to be right, you are saying if blue tacks inside the 3 bolt length circle, it loses the right to establish by entering the circle first. Yes, that's correct. If you go ahead to win, you tack while you're inside that 3 bolt length circle. So in this scenario, if blue had tacked someplace around here, then red would have mark room to sail around and blue would have to stay clear of red. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, green hits that mark, hits the 3 bolt length circle first, and there's no one in between, there's no one overlapped on green or in between green and red. Or excuse me, there's no one in between green and the mark, so green has first to get right of way coming around the mark. Now blue hits the mark and there is overlap, red is overlapped here. So now red has to, blue has to give mark room to both red and to green. One more here. Okay, red is, blue is clear ahead, there's no overlap. Blue hits that 3 bolt length circle. Now blue has right of way, or excuse me, has mark room over red. And red is going to be wrong here because red hits blue. Okay, we're going to skip ahead. We're going to go to, we're going to do a couple on the windward mark here. So on this scenario, red is inside of blue. So red has mark room over blue. But red isn't probably on that ley line. That ley line is going to be right here. So blue is over the ley line, red is under the ley line. So red is going to have a hard time getting around the mark. So what red does is red tries to shoot up and get around the mark. Red does have mark room to do this. But probably what will happen is that red's going to run out of steam and is not going to get around the mark. And so what blue should be doing here, if blue sees this happening, blue should try to take a course where blue's going to sail up here if blue can to stay outside of red and then go around red. Okay.
That was the question sort of I was envisioning was that scenario. So even though red had chosen a faulty course, he still gets room and right of way to tack because he's not going to get around that mark without tacking.
No, he does not get room to tack because once you tack, then you lose your mark room.
So, because he's not going to. I mean, you're sort of envisioning he's going to have enough juice to get around the mark, and maybe he does. But if he runs out of steam right in that picture right there, he's sort of up. His bow is sort of covering the mark and making blue make a wider turn than he normally would have to if he wasn't there. As long as he doesn't cross, his bow doesn't come over the wind, he's still okay. But as soon as he comes over the wind, it's his job to get out of the way.
Correct, because then the mark room passes to blue. And
Got it.
even though red is to leeward of blue, so red would have right of way, once red passes head to wind and then maybe even comes back to starboard, let's say, so red is still to leeward of blue, blue has mark room and gets to sail to the mark. Okay. Let's see, we're on here. Red is not entitled to any mark room here. Red is on port, and red is going to have to tack. There's a special exception for windward marks that when the red can't come in here and tack. So what red should be doing here is ducking blue and sailing up and then sailing around. So here, blue is outside the zone, finishes the tack. There's no overlap, so blue gets to the mark first. Blue has mark room. Now there's overlap, but because blue tacks outside of the zone and then enters the zone, enters the 3 boat length circle, blue has mark room to sail to the mark and to round it. We're going to touch briefly, make sure that, let's see. We're going to touch briefly on, one more piece. So I talked about passing head to wind, you lose your mark room. That jibing doesn't do anything to your mark room. You can jibe as much as you want and you're not going to lose your mark room. Sometimes that's a little misunderstood. Okay, we're going to talk about obstructions. A right-of-way boat, a moored boat, shore or dock are obstructions, and an outside boat must give way to an inside boat. This doesn't come up too often. So here, red and blue are on port, green's on starboard. So green is an obstruction for red and blue. Is considered an obstruction. So red needs to give room to blue. Let's see. So here red is on starboard again. Blue can ask for room to tack because red is the obstruction, and green needs to give that room to blue to tack. So in that scenario, red has to stay out of the way of blue to avoid contact. So blue is technically fouled red, but because blue asked for room to tack and green didn't allow blue to tack, blue is going to be exonerated and green will be the boat that is disqualified. The only exception to that is if, let me start that over. Red asks for room to tack, blue tacks to give red room, and then red doesn't tack, then red is wrong there, and red would be disqualified. The big exception to obstructions is at starting marks. You do not have to give windward inside boats room to pass between you and the starting mark when you're about to start. If a windward boat tries to squeeze in between you and the starting mark, then that's called barging. And so here, at the start, red does not have rights to go in here. There's no room for red.
Joe, this is Lynn. Do you have an example of 18.3?
Is that the rule that talks about where red would be an obstruction? I probably do, but I don't have it on our list. So we are gonna keep going. Okay, now we're gonna talk about starting. The starting line is an imaginary line between the buoy and the committee boat. We talked about the sequence for the start. You must be completely behind the line at your start. And if you're not, you need to sail. If you're over early, you need to sail around the ends, around the starting, either the committee boat or the pin, the buoy on the other side of the starting line. And then if you do have to reround, then you need to stay clear of other boats as they're sailing. So here again, that was like that last animation. When red can't go here, red needs to slow down and give blue, even after the start, there is no room for red to get around the committee boat. The other piece is that for starting is that there's no proper course before a start. So when red gets to red here is going to cross behind, is going to attack and then come up behind blue. Red can force blue up because there's no proper course before the starting line. With that said, the other thing that this animation shows is that when you are all blue can do is do its best to stay out of the way. So because when red starts pushing blue up, red needs to give blue the time and opportunity to stay out of the way. So if blue's sail is luffing and blue really isn't moving that much, moving forward, then blue can't go up. Blue physically, can't move, can't go head to wind. So when red is going to, red needs to make sure that blue has enough time to go head to wind and can't cause a contact. So in this scenario, arguably, if blue can't go head to wind, then red is going to be wrong because red caused contact and didn't give blue room and opportunity to go head to wind.
In that scenario where blue is luffing and much closer to the starting line and red is coming up, red's got it timed so that he is going to start appropriately, but by his position, if blue is forced to avoid him and haul in, he's going to cross the start line prematurely. Is he obliged to avoid red, and that makes him ultimately go over the line before the gun in order to avoid that collision, or does red still, does blue get any leeway in that scenario?
Yeah, red can force blue over the line. That happens all the time. Blue needs to just keep clear. There's no obligation to stay on or anything. But remember that red is timing it right, but red doesn't have right of way until red is to leeward and overlapped on blue. So red, blue has the right to be right where blue is, even if its sail isn't pulled in and he or she's not moving. So even if blue comes in there, red comes in there, red wants to go, head up. If blue can't head up, that's not, as fast as red wants blue to go, That's not blue's problem. You know, all blue can do is move the tiller as far over as possible, and the boat will move as fast as it can. But if that's not fast enough for red, you know, then red hasn't given enough room, opportunity for blue to move. Oh. The sixth one's kind of the same concept. Red is, it's okay for red to be luffing here. Once blue starts moving, can you guys hear me? My headphones just came off. Okay, good. I just ran out of batteries. So when red is going, red doesn't have to start moving towards the starting line until blue starts forcing him up. Now I think blue is also over early here. Maybe not. And again, there is no room. Also, you know, blue still has the obligation to avoid the starting pin there. And blue has right of way over red. So blue can force red head to wind to give blue enough room to get through the starting line. Now, once in this one, red is over early. And so red needs to round the ends and stay clear of all the green boats. Okay. Now we're going to be talking about finishing. Once any part of your boat crosses the finish line, then you're finished. It just has to be the bow, the front of the boat. It's not the entire boat, just the front of the boat. You are finished, but you're not done racing until you leave the finishing area. And if you hit a mark, you must do a 1-turn penalty and then refinish. So got a couple here. So blue has finished here because blue's bow has rounded. Or excuse me, blue's bow has crossed the finish line, but blue is still racing. And because blue is on port and red is on starboard, blue has to stay clear. And if blue can't get past red, even though blue's finished, blue is going to be wrong, is going to have to do turns and then refinish. So blue is, red would win that protest. Now here, you don't need to completely, as I said, cross the finish line, just your bow, and then you can back up. This occasionally happens in really light air days. Where I've done this is where you just cross your bow over, you get finished, then you can just back up and sail back to the buoy field. So it does come up, not too often. Mark room does apply at the finish line. So blue is inside overlapped on red, and blue has room to finish here. So red can't push blue out. Red needs to go bow down, allow blue to get in and room to finish. Okay, the last one here, this is going to be our last animation, and we still have some time for questions. We're scheduled to be done at 12 o'clock, but I can still stick around and answer questions. Cynthia had a comment that, and you all know you have finished because the PRO calls out your sale number. Typically, the race officer is gonna, when someone goes over early, they'll, in the megaphone and the hailer, they'll say over MC 1256, or they'll call it your sale number, then you know you're over early. Excuse me, that you've finished, not over early. So here, red gets to the zone before blue. So red has mark room. Red can squeeze out blue because red has mark room. Red can sail to the mark and can cross it and finish it. Okay, so not as good. Usually, I think the presentation works a little better when we're in person. But does anyone have any questions about any of these rules, or does anyone want to go back to revisit some of the concepts to talk through them more? I know we kind of went through mark room a little fast, and we certainly can go back to any of these that you'd like to.
So if a boat, if a boat is overtaking, in this case, red gets, to the 3-boat circle first, but is being overlapped at the time by blue, then blue actually gets mark room over red. Is that correct?
Yep, like this one?
Yes.
So here, blue has mark room. And so blue gets to sail to the mark and to cross on the other side of it because that's the way it needs to cross. And that also applies to both sides of the starting line. So it applies to the committee boat as well as to the pin end. So if you're coming up on starboard, it's still the same concept. Just like a mark room, just like you would be going on, coming up to a windward mark or to a leeward mark. The only thing that's a little weird that people get confused on the course is, let's say that red is coming up on starboard here. So red would have starboard and blue's on port. The mark room rules are going to trump, and the mark room, blue is going to have room to get into finish.
So if red's on starboard, blue's on port, if blue gets in first, you're saying then the port tack doesn't matter. It's because he's in first, he gets room to finish.
Yep.
And so I just want to be clear. So in a scenario where blue is really above, in this scenario here, blue is above the ley line, and is in sort of a, scenario, as long as he can be above the ley line, as long as he's overlapping the boat that's right on the ley line, he gets, he's going to be able to force red to fall off and gets room to finish.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And what, for red, from just a strategy standpoint, red will go a little faster if red is on, is kind of footing a little bit and is going down a little bit. So what red needs to do is to potentially, what red could do is, before red gets to that 3-boat length circle, red could take blue head to wind and then bear off to get ahead and then give blue room to finish. But once you hit that zone is where blue needs, once you get that 3-boat length circle, that's when blue gets to sail to the mark and to round it.
And what part of the committee boat is the start line going through? The mast or
the mast?
The mast, yeah.
Yeah. It's always the mast that you'll use. The race committee is going to sit usually right behind the mast and to call the boats over, both at the starting line and at the finish line too. Darren had a question. Can you talk about what to do if you are protested or think that you fouled someone? That's a great question, Darren. I think I might have taken out some of those, some of that detail. If you are protested, you need to do a 720, 2 tacks and 2 jibes. Or if you fouled someone, then you need to do 2 tacks. If you think you fouled someone, and even though someone hasn't protested, it's still a good sportsmanship to do 2 tacks and 2 jibes, to do that 720. Because we don't have referees out there, we self-police, and so it's a good sportsmanship. Even if you think you're wrong, is to do the turns. Even if you think, and if you think you did something wrong but no one protested you, still should do your turns. The other thing from a strategy standpoint is that if someone does protest you and you think that you're right, you're still better off, in my opinion, to do your turns, because you don't really lose that much when you do that 720. But if you're disqualified, then you're way, you lose so much more by being disqualified. So I have, I've definitely, when someone's protested me and I think I'm right, like if I tack too close to another boat, then, and someone protests me, I will still do my turns, because usually I'll be able to, beat them. I still have an opportunity to beat them later on in the race. And the other, we didn't mention, if you hit a mark, then you need to do just a 360. You don't need to do a 720. 720 is only when you hit another boat. If you hit a mark or the race committee boat, then you need to do a 360. And even if no one sees you hit the mark, you still have to do that 360.
To clarify, Joe, the two turns, the 720 is not just if you hit another boat, but if you foul another boat. That is, you caused another boat to change their course because of something.
Yeah, exactly right. Good point, Cynthia. There doesn't need to be contact in order for you to foul someone. If a boat that has right of way has to move to avoid contact, then there's a foul, and then the boat that didn't have right of way needs to do turns, even if there isn't contact. Ryan Grosh had a question. What if it's Wednesday night and the RC boat doesn't have a flag? What is the starting line? Then the starting line is the judge himself or herself. And there's a little more leeway, I would say, on that, but it's always going to be the person. So look to see whoever the race committee is. They're going to be the kind of the line.
Because that's the person who's looking down at the pin, and between his or her eyes and the pin is the line.
Correct.
So it's going to be the human being.
Correct. Correct.
One thing I'd like to tell everybody before we wrap up is that John Berg has put together a list of videos on YouTube that address rules, and I can send that out to everyone. So look for that. I'll post it to Slack as well. If you're in LHYC and you haven't joined the racing channel on Slack, then please do, because I can put things there in case I don't have your email.
And if anyone has questions about rules while we're out sailing, while we're down at the lake when we're racing this summer, please stop and ask me, or we can talk through it. It can get a little overwhelming sometimes when you're out on the course. So even if it's something that's you think is obvious, definitely ask me, stop me, and I'm happy to talk through it. We can get the whiteboard out. Usually this presentation, we have a whiteboard and we kind of draw everything and we talk through it. We don't have that here, so it's not as conducive to this program as I'd like, but next year we'll definitely do it again.
Well, thank you very much, Joe.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And,
Thanks for the invite and thank you, Joe.
Yeah,
Pat's,
nicely done.
Pat's been recording, so we're going to see if we can post this recording for you to see again. Didn't have luck last week because it was pretty heavy with all the videos, but let's see if it will work this time.
Great.
Okay, see you later.
Everyone enjoy the beautiful day.
Yeah.
We'll be sailing soon, I hope.
Cynthia, you want to hang on for just a minute?
Sure.
Well, really, Cynthia, all I wanted to say was,
Oh, stop the recording.